Welcome to the Dirty Verdict Podcast, where your hosts, trial lawyers Kyle Herbert and Bill Ogden, and mediator Peter Taff, talk with interesting lawyers and break down recent legal news in detail. Here's Kyle, Bill, and Peter.
All right, welcome back to another edition of the Dirty Verdict Podcast. I am mediator Peter Taff.
I am litigator Kyle Herbert. We are here with another fantastic guest. Peter, you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, Kyle, thank you. So, Kyle, when we started this, one of the origins or one of the reasons why I thought it'd be important is there's so many like legendary lawyers that are no longer with us, and there's no way. During COVID, I listened to podcasts, listened to everything I could. There's very limited interviews with John O'Quinn. In fact, none I don't think that I could find. Very limited, even with Joe Jamil. And so I thought, you know what, there's a lot of, I've been fortunate to know is you have some lawyers that really fall in the category of legendary.
Sure.
And I think doing a service to our fellow lawyers and anyone interested in the law to get some wisdom out there in the ether. And so we've definitely been fortunate to have some legendary lawyers on, and this week's another one of those. So we've got Kent Schaffer with us today. Thank you, Kent, for joining us.
I'm sitting here listening to that thinking, I hope a year from now you're not saying, whoa, why we got him on tape last year.
Knock on wood.
I don't think that'll be the case.
So, so Kent, it's really great for you to join us, particularly too, because Kyle and I have our civil backgrounds, and we have had some criminal lawyers on, but not nearly enough, because at least for the public, criminal law stories are a lot more interesting than talking about trademark and slip and falls and things like that. And your background certainly, we're going to hopefully talk about today, will be some stories that have been well reported in the past, dating back several years. So currently, Kent, you work for your firm is Schaffer, Kennedy, Johnson, and Mays?
Yes. We have 7 criminal lawyers and 1 civil lawyer, Sean Johnson, who just joined 2 months ago.
Okay, where did Sean come from?
He was with Burford Perry.
Okay, good.
He was a clerk at the Texas Supreme Court. Then he went to Burford Perry, went on his own about a year ago, and was looking for somewhere to go, and we ended up teaming up.
Great.
So
and
something new for us.
And that's, in the criminal law world, at least in Houston, it's typically more kind of solos or 2-person shops, but you guys are, I would guess, one of the larger criminal defense focused firms.
I think we're actually the largest. In the reason why, and there is a reason, I remember when I started out at Haynes and Fullenweider, I was an investigator there back in the 70s. And I remember Racehorse going into every trial with a team of lawyers. A client would come in with an important matter, and Racehorse and maybe a partner, and maybe 2 associates, and maybe a law clerk, which are now called paralegals, would all be in on the meeting. And they listen to the problem, and they kick the problem around and discuss it at length, and then come up with the strategy between them, and Haynes would be the lead counsel who would go in and try the case. And I saw that in almost every case, he got good results. Didn't always mean he'd win, but he would come out better than he probably would have come out just going in as a solo on his own. So I've always believed in a team approach and wanted to put that together. And about 10 years ago, we finally did, where I got a good core group of lawyers, and we generally have 2-3 lawyers that work on a case together.
What kind of criminal matters do you guys normally tackle?
Well, the firm does everything. I'd say probably about 70% of my practice is white-collar criminal defense. So they're very document-intensive cases. They're cases that I don't see how one lawyer could do. I mean, it could take, years to go through the amount of discovery we see. But our firm does everything from drunk driving cases to murder, sexual assaults, drug cases. I try to confine my practice to money laundering, fraud, conspiracies, things of that nature.
And now you mentioned this, Rich, you worked for Richard Racehorse Haynes as an investigator before law school?
Right. So back in the mid-'70s, my brother, Randy Schaffer, had just started working with Haynes. And they were trying a case in Austin, Texas. There were three brothers, the Riots brothers from South Texas. One was I think, a state representative, one was a county commissioner, one was a judge. And they all got indicted. And eventually they all got convicted. But Haynes was representing one of them along with my brother in trial in Austin. And I was a drama major at the University of Texas. And this was in April of 1975. And so I went to meet my brother for lunch, and Haynes was there. And he said, "Have you ever seen a trial?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You ought to stick around." So I stuck around, and I was going to watch an hour and then go to class. And it was so riveting to watch Haynes cross-examine Texas Ranger. And I'd never seen anything like that, even in movies. And so I sat there all day, skipped class. I was back the next morning. I spent about the next 4 days watching the trial. And finally, on the last day at lunch, Haynes was saying, "Well, why do you want to be an actor?" So I gave him all the reasons. And he said, "You could end up being 50 years old and be an actor, and you'll be the coolest waiter in Florida. And every now and then, you're going to get a cool theater job, and the restaurant will give you time off." He said, "But, before you make that decision, why don't you come spend the summer working for me and see what you think?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." So he told me to show up on June 1st and spend 3 months working for him. So I showed up June 1st, and Haynes' secretary came out. She said, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I'm reporting for work." She says, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, Mr. Haynes hired me, told me to be here June 1st. My brother was out of town in trial. So she finally called Haynes. He was at home, and he's like, "Who is he? What does he want? Why is he here?" But he came in, and he said, "All right, I'm going to have you work with my investigator." So he sent me down the hall. There was an full-time investigator, retired cop who was working there. And he said, "Fine, you're going to ride with me this summer." So I spent the summer interviewing witnesses with him, sitting in trials, digging through records. Back before there were computerized records, we go get subpoena records and come back with boxes, and I'd examine them and make indexes and put, little markers on them because Haynes would want to, review whatever it was. And then I actually got to sit through a trial with him. And I went back to school in September and changed my major and decided I was going to be a lawyer. And so for the next few summers, I ended up working for Haynes and then went to law school, worked for him all through law school. And when I first got out, and then I went out on my own.
Let me back up a little bit. How did you and Randy make it to the University of Texas, or did he go to UT as well?
Yeah, because we couldn't get into a good school.
Where'd you guys grow up?
Here in Houston, over Old Braeswood. But we went to St. John's. But back then, if you couldn't get into a good private school, you had to go to UT. It was default.
Yeah.
And Randy was smart. He got into the University of Pennsylvania, and he went there couple years, then he got married and had a baby and decided to move back to Texas. But back then, UT was pretty easy to get in. Now you've got to be like top 1% of your class or something crazy.
They were slumming it back then.
Yeah, you couldn't get into SMU or Rice. You had to go to Texas.
Yep. No, it was even when I went, I had started in 89 and it was easy. And now I've got one child has graduated from there and one still there, but it is a grueling process to get in.
That was quite an accomplishment.
I got into the University of Texas and I was just shocked any college would take me. So beggars can't be choosers.
I loved it there. It was a great school. I had a great time. I was going to say, my kids go there. One kid went to Berkeley and one went to Princeton, but I wanted him to go to UT. And now I have a 9-year-old, so I'm kind of grooming him to go there, simply because by the time he's in college, I might not be able to afford Princeton or Berkeley or anything like that.
Or Texas, really. Well, the public schools have gotten more expensive.
Well, yeah, but I'll take state school any day.
For sure. So on Racehorse Haynes, I mean, he obviously, we know, was a legend. Probably younger lawyers may not have even heard of him. So I want to take the opportunity to have someone that knew him well, worked with him. You're mentioning the cross of the Texas Ranger. What was his style on cross? Was it aggressive, or was it more kind of Columbo-ish? No one would even know what I mean by Columbo-ish, but you.
No, I know exactly. There's a lawyer in town that was kind of known for that Columbo style. That was Mike DeGarrett, where you would think he's bumbling around and, absent-minded and confused, and the whole time he's maneuvering the witness into making some fatal mistake. And Mike was a master of that. You wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. Haynes wasn't like that, though, and he wasn't super aggressive. He was tenacious. He would rarely raise his voice, almost never, would not be super confrontational. He's extremely charming and would charm witnesses into letting their guard down. And then he would start impeaching with fact after fact after fact after fact, and it would just keep going on and on and on, but very methodical. And that's something I always tried to emulate, is to not be a yeller and a screamer, not be confrontational for the sake of being confrontational. And I can't do a Columbo style, because if I try to bumble around, then I really am bumbling around. But I learned that from Haynes about be charming, be sincere, let the witness drop their guard, feel relaxed, and then you just methodically go through all the points you need to make, and he would never quit. And back then, there was a different style. I can remember watching Haynes cross-examine a custodian of records for 4 hours. It kept taking the witness on voir dire, and finally the judge wouldn't allow these records to come in. Now, the records didn't mean shit in reality. That was just Haynes. He would not let anything go. And he would keep it interesting. A custodian of records. I don't even remember the last time I questioned a custodian of records, because now it's different. But back then, trials would take forever. There were no time limits. Now you could be in a trial and 5 minutes into cross, the judge is saying, move along, move along. How long will this take? They give you time limits. Back then, there were no time limits. My first trial ever was with Mike Ramsey, who was Haynes' chief associate. Mike went on to become one of the best lawyers in town. And in 1982, 1 year out of law school, I tried a 3-month-long federal case with Mike, representing a co-defendant. And I watched Mike cross-examine the government's first witness for 8 days. He was an informant. And the direct took a day and a half, and cross took 8 days. And so I grew up thinking that's what you're supposed to do. And now everybody's like, oh, you need to get the witness on and off in 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Shit, Mike went on for 8 days. And almost never repeated himself and rarely used notes. But that was that old style of lawyering. Percy Foreman could do it. Haynes would do it. Back in the day, Clarence Darrow could do it. It was that kind of oratorical skill that lawyers had, and could be very commanding on cross. Percy was a lot more aggressive than Haynes. But Percy was a charmer, too. People liked Percy. Even when he was gutting them like a fish, they liked him. I've even heard cops brag about, I'll never forget when Percy Foreman ripped my...
Well, so method of cross-exam also, I assume, requires an extensive amount of preparation to where you can impeach them fact by fact with the document or preparation by the lawyer, and then obviously with the team assisting them.
Yeah, and see that. So when we would do investigation for Haynes, and his associates were there, and I'd be there as the investigator, and you'd start putting together notebooks, mostly handwritten, of course, because we didn't have computers back then, but of all the points that needed to be made. And Haynes would go, well, but he would say, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to attack. This is where I think I can hurt the witness. This is where I think we could show the witnesses why. And we'd start making a notebook on each witness that would have all this stuff, with the heading at the top and then everything underneath it that would rebut it. Prior testimony, a witness statement, a photograph, and make lists like that for him. And the night before, he would take the notebook, he would go through it, walk into court the next day, and I cannot remember. I probably sat through half a dozen trials with him. I never saw him pick up the notebook to cross-examine the witness. He just knew it. He would read it, he'd commit it to memory, he'd come in the next day, and it would just be masterful to watch what he would do.
Did you work there as an investigator for a while, or did you go straight to law school?
No, well, I worked there 3 summers, and then I spent 4 years with him as an investigator. And then after I got out of law school, I ended up trying 2 cases with him. And you would tell, I worked on 1 case with him that he tried, and then I actually tried 2 with him.
Huh. And you went to University of Houston?
Yes.
Did you work during school for him?
Yeah, and the funny thing is back then they had no mandatory attendance rule. And so I probably went to about 20% of all my classes in law school. And the next year after I graduated, one of the clerks in Haynes' office said, because of you, we have a Schaffer rule now. And I go, what's that? He says, it's called mandatory attendance.
But you were learning on the job, so to speak.
Yeah, and I would tell the professors, I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Mr. Haynes is trying the Cullen Davis case. I've got to sit through trial with him. And they're like, oh, yeah, you ought to do that. But you're not going to pass. If you're not here, there's no way you can pass. Maybe you ought to think about quitting. And I wouldn't quit, and then I go take the exam, and I'd do okay.
Yeah, which is pretty ironic because you learn so much. I mean, nothing against formal education, but watching Racehorse Haynes try the Cullen Davis case, I mean, what better education can you get?
I watched him try 2 of them because he tried it 3 times. He tried 2 different cases. One of them he tried twice because of mistrial, and then he tried the second one once. But I had a better education, and I remember and used things from back then that I never picked up in law school. Nothing against law school, but I forgot 90% of what I learned. I remember about 90% of what Haynes taught me.
And that's why I wanted to talk about the rule against perpetuities.
See, I was just trying to think of
Yeah.
Because the other day I saw that. I never understood it. Now I don't need to.
The only people that understand it are real property professors. That's it.
Well, interestingly, my first year of law school, my contracts professor was Elizabeth Warren. Now the senator. It was her first year as a professor.
And she taught what class?
She taught contracts, Section C at U of H.
Nice. Yeah, I knew she was a professor there. I thought it was undergrad, but
she gave me a horrible grade. She's one of the people who told me, you're not going to pass my course. I said, yes, I will, because you have anonymous grading. And she goes, okay, we'll see about that, Mr. Schaffer.
I know your handwriting.
Yeah. I made it by a block of hair. She didn't, I don't think she liked me. That's okay.
So, and then as far as how he billed his clients, and this builds in or goes into the idea that y'all had a collaborative, you'd bring in people from lawyers, law clerks / paralegals, staff. Would you typically, if someone came in with hey, I just been charged, would he quote them a flat fee retainer that covered it, whether it got pled out or tried? It was the same fee no matter what?
Was Haynes?
Yeah, or was it hourly?
I don't remember Haynes ever working by the hour.
So it was just someone would come in and here's what's happened, and he'd kind of think about it and go, okay, $50,000 or whatever.
Yeah, which probably was $50,000, and that was back in 1977.
Right.
He charged extremely high fees, but he was worth it. He wasn't as good at charging as Percy was. Haynes died and had a little bit of money when he died, Percy died, and there was warehouses full of jewelry and art and cars and, who knows what. Percy was a master at setting and collecting fees.
Yeah, you've talked about Percy Foreman. That's another legend that probably I would think most young lawyers certainly haven't heard of. Did you ever see him in action?
Oh, yeah.
Would they ever try? Who was Foreman? What was the partner? There was another name.
Dick Aaron.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So Dick came right out of the DA's office and went to work for Foreman. So, but it was still office as Percy Foreman. Then he changed it to Foreman and DeGuerin. A few years later, Mike DeGuerin joined. It became Foreman. I don't know if he added Mike's name to it or not, but for a while it was just Dick and Mike that worked in little tiny cubby holes. I mean, like a smaller space than my law clerks have today. And those guys were just, working around the clock. They were getting paid very little, and they were going down and trying big cases and winning them. But, Percy was sort of, he was probably, it's hard to say who was better, him or Haynes. They were both on the same level, and there was nobody else on that level. So there were the lawyers who kind of came up under Percy, which were the DeGuerins and Lewis Dixon, Chris Flood. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but there was that camp. And then under Haynes, there was my brother and I, Jack Zimmerman, Ray Bass, Mike Ramsey, Chris Tridico, Dan Cogdell. There was the Haynes camp. And back then, the camps didn't get along that well. It wasn't dislike or disrespect. But, Haynes people stuck to themselves, and Foreman's people stuck to themselves. And if there was a big case, a big murder, either Haynes was going to get hired or Foreman was going to get hired.
There'd be some situations where there'd be multiple defendants, though, and y'all would probably, people from different camps would be representing co-defendants.
That would happen. Yeah. Still does.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Kyle.
So I interned at the DA's office for a very brief period a long time ago.
Was that rude to you?
No, not at all. I was so far down the food chain, I can't imagine you and I would have ever been in the same room together. But I didn't have any interest at all in doing criminal work. I think it's important work. I think it's great that good people want to do it. Why? What drew you to, of all the areas of practice, what drew you to criminal law?
Because I like to help people with problems. I like that somebody can come to me and their life is suddenly in disarray. They've got a horrible problem staring them in the face that can be life-altering, and I can use the talents I have to change that. Can't always fix it, but I can make it better 99.9% of the time. The thing I didn't like about civil law, and at first I did dabble a little bit in civil law, is I found myself spending way too much time arguing about things that to me didn't mean a whole lot. For instance, I did divorce cases, and I actually had to try a jury trial because my female client refused to let her husband have a blanket that the grandmother had given them as a wedding present, and then the grandmother died, and she felt the grandmother wanted her to have it, so she rejected the entire settlement that was being offered because of a blanket. And we spent 2 days in trial, and we won, but we didn't win any more than we were being offered in the settlement. And the judge thought I was stupid, and the jury was smirking, and, it's like these were not high-dollar people. It's like, why are you fighting over this? So that's when I decided I don't want to do divorces. And then I started doing other civil cases where we spent inordinate amounts of time fighting about discovery. In criminal law, there's a lot of clarity. It's basically the state is required to give us everything. And if they don't, it ain't coming in. And it's going to, I've done a number of civil cases lately. I was involved in a huge case against Cheniere Energy 3 years ago. And man, we had a discovery master. We had hearings every Thursday fighting over discovery. There would be 20 to 25 lawyers in the courtroom, thousands of pages of motions filed every week over discovery. And I'd be saying to the lawyers, why don't we just call them and tell them, send us Exhibit A? Oh, no, you don't do that. You got to file the motion. I'm thinking, no, I have other stuff I have to do. But no, we sit in the office until 10 o'clock at night working on a motion that would settle the morning of the hearing. I'm just like, I don't still want to do that. It's good, and I'm glad there's people that do it, and a lot of my close friends do it, and they do very well at it. But that just, I guess because I grew up under Haynes and watching what he did, I just thought that's what I want to do. You know, I want to go into court and fight it out against some prosecutor and get my client's life back in some semblance of order that he can enjoy, and he won't have to go to prison, and nothing bad's going to happen. I guess there's more clarity. Sometimes in civil cases, you can't really tell the woman. I mean, if Tony Busby's client gets run over by a pickup truck and he gets him $1 million, it's easy to tell who won.
Well, any good mediator, not that I know any of those, will tell you if both parties walk away feeling like they kind of lost, and it got resolved the way it should have.
Exactly. The right thing occurred. But in a criminal case, if I lose, I lose.
Yeah. There's no middle.
Yes.
Split the baby, so to speak.
Right.
I always tell people, both sides will be unhappy that day, but then the next day they'll be incredibly relieved to be done with it.
Oh, sure. I've been involved in mediations where, the day it settles is like the happiest day. As the lawyer.
Yeah. How much of that, I'm totally ignorant of criminal law. How much horse trading, and I know that they don't do formal mediations, but like how much of kind of trying to work it out between the state and the accused happens?
That happens a lot. Look, we know a lot of times that our client did exactly what they're accused of doing, and we know it because in this day and age, it's often on videotape or on audio tape, or I represent every major rapper in the city of Houston, and they can't wait to post stuff on Instagram with showing their stacks of money and guns and things that sometimes they just shouldn't have. So you can't run from the facts. So we have to be able to show why something happened in order to mitigate. And a lot of times we can mitigate the case away. So we can make a case go away where the client did exactly what he's accused of doing, but you can often get evidence, facts together to present, to show maybe it was justified, or maybe it's not really that bad, or maybe the guy was having, significant emotional or mental problems, and it's conduct that's unlikely to repeat itself. But you can show why something happened. In a civil case, you can't do that. If you go to, Tony and go, oh, don't sue my client, he's having a bad day, and he just started his antidepressants, and he didn't realize they make him groggy. Tony's not going to go, oh, okay, well, don't worry. But prosecutors may. Yeah. Prosecutors may say, okay, you've shown me, and we just had a case, 60-year-old guy, never been in trouble, accused of, semi-bad things. And we're able to go show that, look, outside of this one issue that came up, nobody was hurt, nobody was killed, nobody lost money, there's no victim here. This guy's got a lot of emotional stuff going on with his children, with his wife, with his job, and he just snapped. And he did something he normally wouldn't do. The prosecutor looked at it and said, all right, look, I'm going to let it go. If your guy gets picked up on something else, I might refile it. But it ain't going to happen. But so that's the kind of horse trading we often do.
Are there kinds of criminal cases won't take?
Yeah, people that can't afford me.
Fair enough.
Yeah. No, you know what's funny? This is kind of came out of nowhere. I remember after January 6th, riots in D.C., I said, this is the one kind of case I won't take. People tried to overthrow the United States government. And, I believe in this country. I don't believe people ought to be trashing Congress and trying to kill the Speaker of the House or the Vice President or anything like that. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm just not interested in these cases. And then a guy called me and said, I want to hire you. I got arrested in the January 6th case. And I'm like, yeah, okay, come on. And I took it. And it just got resolved in the last few weeks. But he was a extremely marginal player. Walked in, looked around, walked out. And he still was prosecuted for it. And that's where I found the injustice. There has to be something about the case that you can grab onto.
Do you feel like they were trying to use him to get testimony against more high profile or bigger?
He didn't know anybody. They were just going to prosecute everybody they could prosecute. They wanted the numbers. And I understand why, because then DOJ could say, oh, we prosecuted 4,325, or whatever the number is. They can point to it as a stat. Well, I mean, this guy, late 50s, great job, never been arrested, went to a rally because he believed in Donald Trump for some crazy reason. And he sat there, and Trump's like, yeah, let's go to the Capitol. And this guy's like, fine, let's go to the Capitol. But then he gets there, and he sees people storming in, so he doesn't go in. And he sits back, and he watches. The police have moved away from the door. And he's like, shit, I'm going to go in and see what's going on. Can I say shit? Yeah, that's okay.
Of course.
And so he walks inside, and it's on video, of course. And there's a timer on the video. He's inside 15 seconds.
Wow.
He looks around in every direction. And he's like, you see him at that point. He backs away. He takes a few pictures. He backs away, and he walks out the door, and he leaves. But when the FBI came to see him, there was an allegation made that he denied ever having gone in. And that...
It's still bad to lie to the FBI.
Right. It could have been a felony. But instead, they said, okay, we'll let him go with a misdemeanor probation. Because technically, if there's barricades put up at the Capitol, it is against the law to cross the barricades. The barricades were put up, they were just flipped over. But they're still considered in place. So it's parading and demonstrating in front of the Capitol.
Are all those cases in D.C., or are they being indicted in their home jurisdiction?
No, in D.C.
Okay.
So it was a D.C. case. But it was a Houston guy. But we were contacted on two other ones, and I wasn't interested in them because they were more of the crazies, the ones yelling at the cops and come here, so to get you.
So let me ask a question, because I hear stories about criminal stuff, and sometimes I think, all right, like I could see myself in some terrible situation in that guy's shoes. And you called the January 6 folks crazies, which I, for the most part, agree with. Were you able to, in interviewing those potential clients and the guy you represented, was there a sense of like what was going on in their heads? Is it just a blind following, or and any theory on that?
Is that come on, any person with any intelligence knows you're not going to go in and get the vice president, force the vice president to declare the vote fraudulent and award it to. That ain't going to happen in a million years. So why would you think it would? Why would you go in and storm the United States Capitol and attack cops or bust through doors or do anything else thinking you're going to really stop it? And I don't think they did, realistically. I saw all these videos of guys going in there, they're walking through the Capitol smoking joints. I think it was just their way of saying, I have power. I can do what I want. You can't stop me. Screw you. And now they're in jail.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to switch gears because there's a ton of interesting cases you've been involved with, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, that you've represented multiple rap artists. So just looking from your website, we've got James Prince, who's the CEO and founder of Rap-A-Lot Records. Slim Thug, Scarface, Pimp C, Peso Peso, Lil Jeremy, and Travis Scott, who I know all those except Peso Peso and Lil Jeremy.
You don't have their latest albums?
No, I don't. But I have many of the other. Well, no one does albums, anymore. But I have many of their songs, and I'm
Streams,
right? So it's starting with, let's see, James Prince, Rap a Lot. What was the nature of that? In anything that you don't feel comfortable or you think is better?
Comfortable. And as people know, I've represented James for 20 plus years, probably 25 years. James is the boogeyman to a lot of people in law enforcement. He has no criminal record at all. He's in his mid-50s. He has made an extraordinary amount of money. And no matter what we say about diversity in Houston, it's still basically a southern white town. Now, whites are probably no longer the majority, but that's not the way a lot of people think. Now, it's better now than it was. But starting back in the 90s, James was constantly targeted by DEA, FBI, Houston police, because they knew that this young black man in his 20s who was making tons and tons of money had to be involved in something illegal, because how else could a black guy make that much money unless he's a professional athlete? And so he was under surveillance 24 hours a day. His phone has been wiretapped numerous times. The FBI had an investigation that went on for 20 years. And a federal prosecutor recently told me, he said, I had to explain to him, if you've spent that long trying to find somebody doing something wrong and you can't find it, you have to consider the possibility maybe they're not doing anything wrong. But this is a guy who was the founder of Southern hip hop, and he made a lot of money. I mean, he represented some of the biggest rappers at that time through Rap a Lot Records. He's one of the most successful boxing managers in the country right now. He's got numerous title holders. He owns a boxing gym here in town. His fighters, get main fights in Vegas, New York, New Jersey. He is in farming. He's a successful farmer. He owns a wine company. He owns a condom company. All of his businesses do extremely well. This guy works like 18 hours a day, probably 6 days a week. And he's earned a lot of success. And because of that, he's made a lot of enemies among those cops. It was interesting that the two cops who hounded him the most, one of them was just sentenced to 13 years in prison, a DEA agent by the name of Chad Scott, for actually setting people up, for framing them. And FBI and Office of Inspector General started an investigation, and the guy was indicted in 2 federal cases and got convicted. So, James is somewhat vindicated by that. This is James' main antagonist for years and years and years. So I've represented him throughout many of the investigations that have gone on. But other than that, just, James is a very careful person. He doesn't do business deals. He doesn't even post on the internet usually, unless a lawyer looks at it to make sure he's not doing anything wrong, because he never wants to have to defend himself. And so he's one of the most thoughtful persons in terms of everything he does. He thinks about it first to make sure there's no possible way he can be accused of wrongdoing. So there's been lots of rumors, lots of gossip, but at the end of the day, there's never been a criminal charge sustained against him.
Have you represented that company or him in any civil disputes?
I know I have, and I can't remember what. I've negotiated licensing deals with clothing companies for Rap a Lot. And I know I represented them in a civil case 20 years ago. I don't remember what it was.
Was that kind of was he your first client in the rap business?
No, actually, Pimp C was. Pimp C had just written a song with Bun B called Big Pimpin' that was recorded by Jay-Z. And so Jay-Z actually hired me to represent Pimp C when he got in trouble here in town.
And what was the connection with Jay-Z?
I knew one of the lawyers who was working for him. And when this case came up in Houston, I got a call from Sean Carter. And this is like 28 years ago, 29 years ago, before Jay-Z blew up as big as he did. And he calls, hey, this is Sean Carter. I go, oh, hi. And he goes, yeah, they call me Jay-Z. And he said, I've got this rapper down in Houston, and he's in jail, and I need to hire a lawyer. So I didn't realize, how big the guy was, but I quoted a fee. And the next day I had a check for that amount. And I was like, shit, this guy's for real. And, ended up working out a good result. And it just kind of took off from there.
And so the Travis Scott matter, is that in connection with Astroworld or other things?
Well, I've done other work for Travis before Astroworld, but the representation that just concluded had to do with Astroworld.
And what was the outcome of that? At least it's publicly, you can talk publicly about.
Yeah, well, it is public. The grand jury conducted an investigation. The DA's office had a few prosecutors working on it with numerous HPD officers that went on from November 2021 until late June, just 2 weeks ago. And it's probably the biggest investigation ever conducted by HPD in terms of the amount of witnesses interviewed, tapes and photographs, recordings examined, use of consultants, everything from engineering to, meeting with all the plaintiffs' lawyers to solicit their theories of criminal liability. These guys generated about a 1,200-page report and submitted it to the DA's office to take it to a grand jury to investigate, A, was a crime committed, and B, was Travis responsible, or perhaps Stormore, which was the local promoter, or 5 or 6 other individuals who were responsible for various aspects of the concert. So the grand jury heard from at least 2 police officers, perhaps more, but I'm aware of 2, who spent a year and a half doing nothing but working on this case. And we made a presentation to the grand jury as to why we believe there was no criminal liability, and the grand jury agreed.
Is that unique for defendants to be able to make a presentation to the grand jury?
Yes and no. Most lawyers have probably never done it. We do it probably 3 or 4 times a year. You don't do it in every case. And you don't do it in every case because sometimes when the case is that new, you don't know all the facts. So you don't know what to present. How do you present a defense when you don't even know about the allegation in detail? Sometimes you can't do it because your guy's guilty as shit. So there's really nothing you can tell the grand jury that's going to help. And third, if you know it's the kind of case you're going to be indicted for anyway, why do you want to play all your cards now? In criminal law, they have to give us the evidence. We don't have to give them anything. Unlike in civil cases where both sides swap evidence, I can sit on stuff until trial. So it's the unusual case where you make a presentation. The DA does not have to permit you to do it, but I have never seen the district attorney's office tell me I can't make a grand jury presentation. And the reason that they don't, and I've had numerous DAs tell me this, is because if a grand jury listens to my evidence and they don't indict, then that DA could never make the case at trial. It's a very low standard of proof to indict. It's probable cause, which is more likely than not. Well, if a DA can't overcome my evidence before a grand jury, how are they going to make proof beyond a reasonable doubt? So the prosecutors usually like you to make a presentation, if you will, because if you get indicted, they now have all your evidence. They know exactly how you're going to defend the case. And on the other hand, if the grand jury no bills, oh, well, we obviously didn't have a case to begin with. So it's not unusual. In the Astroworld case, out of all, there were 7 or 8 targets, and I'm the only one that made the presentation. A lot of there were a few good lawyers. Dan Cogdell was representing somebody. Chris Downey was representing somebody. But then there were a lot of these like New York firms and DC firms with the white collar, former DOJ type lawyers who've never done grand jury presentations. So their attitude is, well, let's just sit back and wait and see what happens. But I knew the possible issues that I was at Astroworld the night of the concert. I was there until 3 or 4 in the morning.
Did you experience any mental anguish?
Huh?
Did you experience any mental anguish at the show? Because the statute hasn't run yet.
I do experience mental anguish quite frequently, but not because of trouble.
There is just watching the show.
No, the funny thing is I'd been there. I had a number of clients perform throughout the day, other rappers. So I went out there to see them like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And then I was backstage in the artist compound, and around 7:30, I walked out in the VIP section where we'd be standing for the concert. And it wasn't that full in that section. Now, later, it was very full. But it's 7 o'clock, 7:30, there's hardly anyone there. So we were fairly close to the stage. And then at about 8, I told this guy I'm with, I said, I tried to get my wife to go, and my wife's like, I'm not going. I have a 30-year-old son. I was trying to get him to go. He's like, I ain't going. And so I got a lawyer from my office, a young kid who just took the bar, I said, you want to go to Travis Scott? He goes, fuck yeah, I want to go to Travis Scott. So he went. So I said, dude, I'm going to run to the bathroom. I'll be right back. So I walked quarter of a mile to the bathroom. As I'm coming back, there's now like 6,000 people in that section. And I'm like, fuck, I'm 68 years old. I'm going to be standing here drinking beer at 11 o'clock at night, have to go to the bathroom, fight my way through about 12,000 people. So I went back to him. Meanwhile, I get a text from somebody associated with the concert who was with Drake at the Post Oak Hotel. And he sent me a text saying, hey, we're hanging out in Drake's suite. Why don't you come over? So I go back, I grab this young lawyer and said, I'm going to the Post Oak. And he goes, dude, Travis is coming on in like an hour and a half. I go, I'm going to go have a drink with Drake. He goes, oh, I'm going with you. So we left. And at 8 o'clock, I was over at the Post Oak. And we were going to go back to the Astroworld. And, I'm just like, no, I don't want to go. I'm going to go to the Oak Room. I'm sit here and have a drink, and I'll watch it on Apple TV. And so I sat there and streamed it on Apple TV, thinking, I sure am happy I'm not there. An hour later, I'm getting a call from Travis's manager saying, are you here at the concert? I go, oh, man, no, I took off like, a little while ago. What's going on? He goes, there's a whole bunch of people that died of drug overdoses. You need to get over here. So I drive back to the concert area, and the police chief, fire chief, county judge, Leno Hidalgo, all of it. Sylvester, I don't think Sylvester came, but the rest of them were all there. And the story going around is that some crazy guy was running around jabbing people in the neck with a syringe and giving them fentanyl, and that was the story that the police were confronted with. It wasn't until, and even the next day, the chief was still on, we're investigating that because somebody stabbed a paramedic with a syringe. And it was only a day or two after that they found that paramedic, and he said, no, that didn't happen. But so I was out there until 3:30 or so in the morning until everybody left.
How did you get through? I assume there's mass chaos. So how did you get through? Everyone else is running out and you're going in.
Because there were cops there, with Travis Scott's lawyer, and I had, what do they call it? all access pass. Got it. So they let me in.
So and I haven't followed this closely. Were there any indictments, criminal indictments associated?
No, not at all. And so a lot of people don't understand why. They're like, well, I just don't understand. 10 people died. How could there be no indictments? Well, in Travis's situation, they're saying, well, the concert area was designed in such a way that he should have known people would die. Okay, well, that's well and good, except for the fact Travis has no responsibility for the design of the venue. That's all Live Nation. And Live Nation hires presumably the best companies in the world to come engineer, design, construct the venues for every concert they do. Or at least you would think they would. I think so. I mean, no company apparently is better than Live Nation at producing concerts. And if there is a better company, Live Nation buys them. So presumably they have the best people. And they're saying, well, there should have been more security. Well, that's by contract, that's Live Nation. That's not Travis. They're supposed to hire security. Well, they hire a company called CSC, which has a reputation as being the best in the business. They bring in 750 security guards, plus hired 530 off-duty HPD officers. So you have over 1,250 security personnel. It's the second largest contingent of security personnel at any event in Houston, next to the last Super Bowl we had here, where there were, I think, 1,500. And my investigator was the head of the FBI's contingent that did the Super Bowl security, that was in charge of the security at the Super Bowl. So he had a lot of experience with it. And, there was no deficiency in the number of security personnel. Were they all doing their job? I have no idea, but that's not Travis's fault. Then they look at, well, why didn't Travis see what was going on in the crowd? Well, he had 650 lights pointed at him from the ground, from the sky, from straight across, from behind him. I mean, no matter where he turns, every light is pointed at Travis, so people all the way in the back of the venue could see him. So the audience isn't lit, but he's lit. So there's no way he could see over, and we measured it out, but it's not that far. He could see 10 rows into the audience maybe, or 12 rows, depending on where he is, but he couldn't see back where the people were being injured. So they, they're like, well, but why couldn't he hear? Well, shit, there's 50,000 people screaming. And if you watch the videotape of the concert, yeah, there were some people hurt and killed. You don't see it on the tape, but the screaming was almost louder than the music, from people in the crowd jumping up and down and trying to sing along or whatever, you rap along, whatever they were doing. So there's really no theory under which Travis could be criminally responsible. You can't say he did something that caused it, so it's not an act of commission. And it wouldn't be an act of omission unless he owed a duty and could reasonably foresee that death would result or serious bodily injury if he failed to perform that duty. So the prosecutors, I think agreed, and the grand jury certainly agreed, that there was no omission or act that would lend itself to criminal responsibility.
And then the thing is even if he had perceived all that, what could he have done about it? It's not like, he's Travis Scott. He's a pretty talented guy, but he can't single-handedly stop a frenzy like that.
All right, see, so that's one of the theories that came up, because at some point, Troy Fenner, and for people who don't know who Troy Fenner is, he's our police chief. 2 hours after the concert was over, stood out on the grounds right by the Astrodome in a press conference. And they're going, why didn't y'all stop the concert? And he said, it's not that easy. He said, if we had stopped the concert abruptly with this many people, there could have been rioting and more people could have been hurt or killed. He said, so we conferred with the department heads at HPD, with the fire department, with the fire chief, with the NRG people that are here, and we concluded that it should be stopped at a certain point, and that's when it was stopped. And we think we made the right decision. The next day, he held a press conference with the mayor and the county judge and the fire chief, and they're all there, and he said the same thing. A week later, he holds a press conference, and he's saying, ultimately, it's Travis Scott's fault. He should have stopped that concert. I'm thinking, fuck you. You're the one that was sitting here saying that you made the decision. And they did. The police sent word to the company, CSC, that as soon as Drake leaves the stage, tell Travis to wrap it up. CSC told Travis's bodyguard, the head of his security, who went and told the sound man who can speak to Travis through a mic. Only one person could talk to Travis while he's on stage. And because Travis has his little earpiece. And so the guy that runs the soundboard can sit there and talk to him. So he said, Travis, I just got word as soon as Drake leaves the stage, you need to close the show. And Travis nods. 2 minutes later, Drake takes the stage. He does about 12, 13 minutes, leaves the stage. Travis does an abbreviated version on his last song, which took about a minute and a half, told everybody good night, be careful going home. They turned around and left. Exactly what they told him to do. So, but Fenner was the one who came up with this thing about, well, ultimately, Travis should have stopped it. No, Travis was up there performing. You should have told him to stop it. All you had to do is tell the sound guy, cut the sound, cut the lights on, and they would have done it. 2 years earlier in Astroworld, they have an 11 o'clock curfew. 2 minutes after 11, Troy Denner gave the order to cut on the lights and cut off the sound, and they did. So they know how to do it. And so the thing is, it's probably not anybody's fault in a criminal sense. I think the police probably messed up to some extent. Maybe NRG, maybe Live Nation, maybe CSC. I never looked at the case from that angle. My angle was to look at it as to whether there was criminal liability. Smarter people than me will decide if there's civil liability.
Someday.
And richer people.
Yeah, someday very long in the future on that case.
Thanks for joining us this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit our website at www.dirtyverdict.com. If you are interested in coming on as a guest or have a story idea, please email us at story@dirtyverdict.com.